All right. I was telling you at the early service. My first call was out in the middle of nowhere, South Dakota. It was just ranching country, and one of my churches was 25 miles outside of town, and it was a job to get there. Some Sundays when the wind was blowing and the snow was coming, but one of those Sundays I remember I made it out there, busting through the drifts and stuff like that, and only had 3 or 4 people showed up there, and I was getting ready to start the service, and one of the old ranchers comes up to me. He says, Pastor, when I'm out feeding the cattle and only a couple of them show up, I don't dump the whole load, and so won't give you the whole load here today, but we'll do that. But we are going to continue our story. We started the Gospel of Mark. We're reading our way through the Gospel of Mark. Last week we had this really interesting story within a story, right? Where we started one and came back and forth. Stories about healing, salvation, and about how and the connection between faith and healing. Jesus would say, "It's your faith that has made you well." There was something that we bring to this relationship as well. Well, today we have a different kind of sandwich of story. There'll be a story of rejection, a story about good news, and then another story about rejection. And it begins right where we left off. It begins like this. Jesus left that place and came to his hometown, and the disciples followed him. On the Sabbath he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astounded. They said, "Where'd this man get all this? What is this wisdom that's been given to him? What deeds are being done by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James and Joseph and Judah and Simon? Are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. And Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor, except in their hometown, among their own kin, and in their own house." And he could do no deed of power there, except he laid his hands on a few sick people and cured them. He was amazed at their unbelief. Again, here we see this connection between faith and being healed. I mean, Jesus had no less power than he did before, but it was if people were not receptive, they were not open to receiving that power, trusting in that power, it was hard for him to do the kinds of stuff he was doing everywhere else. Someone asked me, "Well, is that why we don't see miracles nowadays like we did in the old days?" And maybe there's something to that. Maybe we see what we're looking for. If our minds are already made up, then it doesn't matter what kind of witnesses or proof. It's not going to make any difference. Well, Jesus experiences this resistance, right? That this life-changing good news that was able to everywhere else was not received by those who were very familiar with him, or already sort of thought they knew who he was. So he heads out to the villages where their minds were not made up. But this time it's not just Jesus doing the healing. Keep on reading. Jesus went among the villages teaching. He called the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2. Gave them authority over unclean spirits, ordered them not to take anything for their journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belts. Wear sandals, but don't put on 2 cloaks. He said to them, "When you enter a house, stay there until you leave the place. And if a place doesn't welcome you, they refuse to hear you, just shake off the dust that's on your feet." Testimony against them. And they went out and proclaimed that all should repent. And they cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and cured them. So the 12 are sent out. Their messages, their actions were the same as Jesus, right? They said the same words, they did the same stuff Jesus was doing, because it was the power of God that was working through Jesus that also was working through them. And word spreads, again, like it does. People go crazy if they hear this. So we read on, it says, King Herod heard about it, for Jesus' name had become known. Some were saying, John the Baptizer has been raised from the dead, and for this reason the powers are at work in him. But others said, oh, it's Elijah. Others said that's a prophet, like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard it, he said, It's John who I beheaded, and he's been raised. Now, that's really a strange thing to say. Why in the world would you think that? If someone showed up, this is the guy that I killed. Now we say, well, wait a second, what happened? John is dead? We didn't hear about this in the gospel, right? And so Mark gives us then a flashback. Says, oh yeah, that's right, I didn't tell you about John being killed. So now he gives us a flashback into the story to understand why it was that Herod was so obsessed with John the Baptist. Now, when I say King Herod, it's not the same King Herod that tried to kill the baby Jesus. Remember the wise men and all that? That was Herod's dad, right? The Herod family was a dynasty that went through several generations of ruling there. But he had learned from his dad how to be a brutal dictator, right? He was obsessed with power. He thought he was above the law. He could do whatever he wanted to do. He had this massive ego. People just lived in fear of him. And he was just totally devoid of any moral character. He'd rather execute an innocent man than admit he was wrong. And now, you don't cross someone like that without paying the price, which is the story of John the Baptist, because he dared to point out to Herod, to speak truth to him. So we read on. It says, Herod himself had sent men who arrested John and bound him and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod married her. And John had been telling Herod, it's not lawful for you to take your brother's wife. Herodias had a grudge against John. She wanted to kill him, but she couldn't because Herod feared John. Knowing he was a righteous and holy man, he had protected him. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, yet he liked to listen to him. But an opportunity came when Herod had a birthday party. He gave a banquet for his courtiers and officers and on the leaders of Galilee. And when his daughter Herodias, his wife is named Herodias, the daughter's also named Herodias, right? When his daughter Herodias came in and danced, it pleased Herod and his guests. The king said to the girl, ask whatever you wish, I'll give it to you. He solemnly swore to her, whatever you ask, I will give you, even half my kingdom. So she went to her mother and said, well, what should I ask for? And mother said, the head of John the Baptist. Immediately she rushed back to the king. She requested, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. Well, the king was grieved, but out of his regard for his oath and the guests, he didn't want to refuse her, so immediately he sent for a soldier of the guard to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in the prison and brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl. The girl gave it to her mother, and his disciples heard this. They came and took his body and laid it in the tomb. What a messed up bunch of people. All right. But so why is the story in the Bible? Why did I need to hear that? Well, I think it's there as a warning for Jesus and for those who would follow him that when you speak truth to power, it doesn't come without a risk. Now today, hopefully we'll have a quorum. We can have an annual meeting to be able to do this and talk about things. Typically, when we have an annual meeting day like this, I tend to use my sermon time to sort of give the State of the Church address. And this year I hesitate to use that term because I've got a really bad taste in my mouth from the State of the Union. All right, it was not a pretty night. I thought I was prepared. All right, I had really lowered my expectations. Right, I no longer expected to hear anything remotely resembling a person of faith. I expected to hear lots of bragging and unsupported superlatives, and I wasn't disappointed in that way. But what I didn't expect, what threw me, what sort of pushed me over the edge, was this Presidential Medal of Freedom. Right. Highest honor that we can give to a civilian in this country. And it was given to Rush Limbaugh. I go, I don't get that. Now, we live in a country where there's free speech and people can have different opinions, and I think that's important for us. But how we speak is really important as well as what we're saying. Now, Rush didn't invent hate speech and bigotry, but boy, did he ever make it popular. Right? He's the one who really brought it into the mainstream. More than anyone else that I can think of, helped create this climate that we have right now where there's a total lack of civility in our public discourse. And for me, I mean, if I was thinking, I mean, we are so divided right now as a country. If there ever was a time we needed the opposite of Rush Limbaugh, this is it, all right? We need a time to be able to step back and just quit demonizing people who are different than us because they have a different view, a different way of looking at that. We can disagree. We don't have to demonize them or try to bring vengeance or punish on anyone who disagrees with us. If there was ever a time that we take seriously Jesus' teachings about how do we deal with people that are different than us, I think it's now. Jesus said, love your enemies, right? You include the outsider. There's healing that can happen to bring communities back together. And that's why I found it so moving. A couple days later, it was Thursday morning, they had the National Prayer Breakfast. This sort of bipartisan gathering of people to gather around prayer. And the keynote speaker, a guy named Arthur Brooks, I didn't know Brooks before, but I just appreciated so much what he had to say, because he was talking about exactly this love of those who are different than us. And Brooks said, I'm not just talking about civility or tolerance. He says, that's not enough. That's setting the bar way, way too low. He said, Jesus didn't come and say, tolerate your enemy. He said, love your enemy. Unfortunately, the president, when he got the microphone, said, well, I have to disagree with you on that one. It wasn't Brooks he was disagreeing with. This is Jesus. But Brooks is right. I mean, the only way forward from the mess that I see us in right now is coming back to saying there's got to be something bigger than each of us, this greater good. And it's going to start with loving those who we disagree with and finding a way to have those important, difficult conversations. When I think of let me get back to the state of the church. Sorry, I got digressed there. But when I think about church, and here let me talk first about the larger church. I mean, those people of whatever brand who think of themselves as Christians. I believe that we are at really a watershed moment as we look at saying, what is it going to mean to take this name Christian? Is it going to stand for something or not? Or what is it going to stand for? And I think there's getting to be more and more two very different views of what that is. It can be a way of life that is going to be based on love and compassion, or is it going to be a way of living that is focused on wealth and power. It's a scary time. And a lot of people are looking at the whole mess and saying, I'm done with church. I don't get this. I'm not going to even mess with it anymore. Which is a very scary time for those of us who love the church. To say, are we getting to a point where we're not even relevant anymore? Well, when I think of the state of this church, Joy Lutheran, I have one word that really comes to mind. I've been thinking about this, and the word is hopeful. I mean, this congregation knows something about divisiveness, right? The years prior to me coming, the congregation went through an awful time, but lived through that, and has come out the other side. And we don't go back, keep dwelling on the past, where part of being hopeful means we set our eyes on the future. To be hopeful means we don't give in to fear. I had this great song, I don't know if you heard it as you were coming in this morning, about not letting fear own us. To know that we can get through difficult times, right? Hopeful means, hopeful is not just about what we do for an hour on Sunday morning, right? Being hopeful is a way of looking at life, a way of living, a way where love becomes the operating principle. And that love gets shown in so many different ways. It gets shown on Wednesday nights, served out in the kitchen. It comes in the form of quilts and cards and prayer shawls and hot dishes and cookies and bars. It shows itself as mission projects and food pantry donations and making food for caring and sharing hands. It's seen in caring for the earth. It's seen in making loaves of love for Malawi. It comes in being present with our young people, our teenagers, as they are growing and needing mentors and guides to walk with them. It comes as our youngest ones are having their faith formed. It comes through music, through so many ways. I mean, there is a lot of love in this place. That's what gives me hope. There's an old saying, I'm not even sure who said it, but it is so true. It says, I don't know what the future holds, but I know who holds the future. That is our hope. That is what we cling to. Let's get the band back up here. There's a song about being the church. And there's that real distinction. It was one of the, I think it was in seminary or somewhere. They had a variation on the swear jar that whenever you referred to the church as a building, you had to put money in the thing, because the church isn't a building, it's a people. And sometimes we keep thinking and talking about church as a structure. I realize it's not about that. The church is the people of God gathered together. And so this is a song that says that we are the church.